Hello folks, so this is one of the first lectures about the special senses, and the special senses in this case is smell, taste, hearing, vision, and balance is actually a special sensation. Okay, so in this case, we're actually going to start with, in this case, the sense of smell, and we're going to actually be talking about smell and taste in this lecture video, which hopefully should be short. So this is the in this case, this is actually the way that you smell things. You actually have, in this case, this is the olfactory. The first cranial nerve is the olfactory nerve. Cranial nerve 1 is the actual olfactory nerve. And at the end, it's actually, in this case, enlarges to actually create an olfactory bulb. And there's extensions that actually goes to the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. Okay, this is actually the bone that's actually rests here. And then it penetrates into, in this case, your nasal cavity. And if you take a closer look of this olfactory epithelium, you can actually see that you actually have neurons, in this case, a cell body, that actually extends and actually has olfactory hairs or cilia that actually then binds to other molecules. Okay, there are multiple types of cells in the olfactory epithelium, and it's going to be the same for in this case, the sense of taste as well, right? You actually have a supporting cell. And this is just epithelium, and all it does, folks, is it actually, in this case, sustains and actually helps, in this case, the olfactory, olfactory cell to actually, receptor cell to actually do its function. And then you actually have mucus, like olfactory glands that actually secrete mucus, okay? And then there's this thing called basal cells. Basal cells are actually precursors for, in this case, your olfactory receptor cell. So because there's a lot of stress in this area, you have to understand, especially if you're a smoker or if you're actually in an area when there's a lot of pollution entering into your nasal cavities, what happens, folks, is this olfactory receptor cells get replaced by the basal cells. So as these guys die, this basal cells actually, in this case, replaces and actually develops into a new olfactory receptor cell. All right, FYI, smell is a very, very complicated sensation because all of this, and FYI, sensations means to say these are inputs, these are ascending pathways, if you want to think about them. This is one way, this is all going back, in this case, to the brain. All right, and the olfactory integration center for smell and actual taste is actually in your temporal lobe, right? Actually deep into your temporal lobe, in an area of the brain called the insula. All right, but again, what happens, folks, is when enough odor molecules actually bind to the olfactory hairs, and this is mediated, folks, by the mucus. Without mucus, folks, our sense of smell is actually quite degraded. Okay, so you need some liquid here, and then the odor molecules then actually, in this case, interacts with the mucus layer, and then they bind to these hairs, and when enough of them bind to the hair, that triggers the actual, in this case, an actual action potential or an actual impulse to actually start from the olfactory receptor cell. Okay, remember again, three main cells: basal cells, supporting cells, and the olfactory receptor cell. Cranial nerve 1 goes into the insula of the temporal lobe. So that's the sensation of smell. All right, we actually can deduce multiple different smells. All right, and some of them can be nice, or some of them can be actually quite nasty, but we're not gonna talk about that, okay, because some of those like being used to smells are actually an innate, or I'm sorry, not innate, but an acquired behavior. Okay, then we have the sense of taste, which is called gustation, and again, the same functional area is actually the same area integrates the sensation of taste as the sense of smell. Again, it's in the insula, which is a region of the temporal lobe. And we actually have this taste buds, if you want to think about it. This taste buds, folks, okay, are actually this small, okay, you actually have multiple types of papilla. Okay, papilla are these raised areas actually on your tongue. You actually have multiple types. You have valate, you have circumvallate, you actually have fungiform, you actually have, I already forget the third part. Okay, it actually is, I think it's but the fungiform and the valate papilla are actually the ones that actually have a role in the sensation of taste. And if you look at the cross section, again, what happens is you actually obviously have saliva here, and what happens, saliva mixes with, in this case, flavors, and they actually penetrate, and then they actually bind to one of these taste buds. the taste buds, the architecture of the taste bud is similar to the architecture of the olfactory epithelium. You have supporting cells, which are in between the gustatory cell. The gustatory cell is similar to the olfactory receptor cell. So these are the actual cells that actually, in this case, start the process of sensation, right? And what happens is you actually also have basal cells. And if you remember, basal cells from the olfactory epithelium are the ones that actually replace the receptor cell, in this case, this gustatory cell. So this is similar in this case. All right. Now, there are how many senses of taste, of flavors do we actually have? We actually have salty, sweet, right? We actually have bitter, we have sour, and we have the umami flavor, which is the fifth flavor. All of those flavors are induced by different compounds. The flavor sour is induced by hydrogen ions. All right. So H plus ions induces the sour taste. And that's why acidic things normally are sour. Okay. Bitter is induced by nitrogenous compounds. So anything that has nitrogen will actually induce a bitter flavor. So caffeine, which is bitter, okay, actually has a lot of nitrogen in there, right? So so that is actually one of the reasons why you actually have like coffee is bitter. It's because, again, of nitrogenous compounds, okay, of the element nitrogen. Okay, salty, folks, is induced by positive metal ions, and specifically we're talking about the sodium and the potassium ions. So sodium, when it binds to a gustatory cell, okay, induces this, like in this case, the flavor of saltiness, or potassium, or any metal in this case. All right, don't go licking all kinds of metal to prove a point, but again, primarily positive metal ions create the sensation of saltiness. Okay, so what have we covered? Sweet is actually induced by sugars. And when we talk about sugars, if you recall from the first lecture, we're talking about glucose, fructose, galactose. Okay, those, in this case, those monosaccharides. Okay, all of those bind. Okay, and they actually then create that sensation of sweetness. Okay, the last but not least is in this case, the flavor of saltiness, or not saltiness, but meat. Okay, that savory flavor, which is called the umami flavor. The umami flavor is actually induced by an amino acid called glutamate. Right? Does that sound familiar to you? Well, the reason why that sounds familiar is because glutamate is the precursor for the things that we tell our Chinese restaurants that to put into our food, called monosodium glutamate. All right. FYI, I am Asian, obviously. If you've seen me before, but MSG, folks, just had a bad rap. But the reason why things that have been treated or actually been flavored with MSG taste so delicious is because they induce a higher savoriness. Okay, so the reason why mushrooms actually have a meaty and savory taste is because mushrooms actually have a high amount of glutamate. All right, so that is one of the tricks. Okay, the reason why soy sauce is so delicious is because it has a high amounts of glutamate in this case, and monosodium glutamate is just, in this case, it's just a very minorly tweaked glutamic acid in this case. Okay, so again, know those flavors, know those flavor profiles, and know what induces them. Sweet by monosaccharides, right? Bitterness by nitrogen. Okay, sour by hydrogen ions, salty by sodium, potassium, in this case metal ions, and obviously the umami flavor by the amino acid glutamate. Right? If we go to the gustatory pathway, folks, is actually, in this case, inputted, okay, through two different cranial nerves. The anterior portion of your tongue is innervated, in this case, and to give you the sense of taste, by facial nerve, cranial nerve 7. Okay, and the posterior portion of your tongue is actually innervated for the sensation of taste by cranial nerve 9, and cranial nerve 9, folks, is actually the glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay, and so what happens is, as you can see, there's a diagram here. You actually have food tastes better if you can actually smell it. You actually have the tastant, which is the receptor. In this case, this is nitrogenous because this is coffee. Binds, triggers, okay, and then it goes all the way up again to your temporal lobe into this area called the insula. All right. Now, there are some funny things that actually happen here, and what happens, folks, is there's actually an innervation. The thalamus actually, in this case, connects. Those are the interneurons here. But one of the interesting things is the bitterness here. Okay, now in the olden days, people used to try to map the tongue. They would say, oh, this area is sweet, that area is actually what detects saltiness, that area is actually what this, like what does bitterness, and blah blah blah. Folks, those old taste maps of tongue in the olden days, those are all a bunch of foolishness. Okay, that's not true. We actually have in this case taste buds, in this case responsible for all 5 flavors distributed all over the tongue. So you can taste sweet here as much as you can taste sweet there, and so on and so forth. All right. So very, very important. So don't be bogged down by any of those things. So again, gustatory and the olfactory pathways. Okay. The olfactory pathway comes from the nose, and you actually the 3 types of cells in the olfactory epithelium, similar to the gustation pathway. You have basal cells, supporting cells, and the receptor. In the terms of gustatory pathway, that receptor is called a gustatory cell. In the terms of smell, those are called olfactory cells. Okay, different cranial nerves, right? The sense of smell comes from, in this case, enters the brain through, like in this case, through cranial nerve 1, the olfactory nerve. And in terms of taste, this is through cranial nerve 9, the glossopharyngeal nerve, and cranial nerve 7, which is the facial nerve. Okay, so I hope that helps.